So let's start this morning with unemployment because, folks, it is not looking good. This is front page of the Wall Street Journal this morning. Unemployment expected to reach its highest level since the Great Depression. Now, this has been persistent unemployment that we've been hearing about from the Congressional Budget Office. They released a 10-year economic report last week projecting the U.S. unemployment rate would remain elevated above its pre-pandemic level through the end of 2030. 2030. That's our own Congressional Budget Office in the United States. Well, now the new report is out from the Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development, the OECD. This is a group of basically 36 other countries that the U.S. Partners with. It's a Paris-based research company, and they look at 36 indexes, 36 world countries, the United States being one big piece of this. Now, their numbers are not as dire as our very own Congressional Budget Office. So instead, they've looked at data through the end of 2022, and it is not good. They're seeing economic Great Depression and not returning to pre-pandemic levels until 2022 at the earliest, according to the OECD. And they're basically saying, and they also say in this report, that if you remove stimulus too quickly, it could be devastating. They said that government should launch new programs. Did you hear me? They should be launching new programs, not pulling back on stimulus. They're saying they need to hire workers. This money needs to go to getting people back into the market or hiring workers and getting people into the market for the very first time. So I look at that as also some sort of student loan incentives in the United States, encouraging workers to try to get into the job force. Some sort of a student loan forgiveness piece would be a huge part of that. That's one of the things being floated right now by Senate Democrats is student loan forgiveness, which is saddling our young people. So one of the big things that the OECD is calling for is getting us into the market, but not pulling back on this stimulus right now. And what they're saying is it all hinges on a second wave of coronavirus. That if we're teetering right now, and their projections are for 2022 based on where we are today. But if we really fall into a second wave, which it appears we're already seeing in Texas and Florida and other spots, a full-on second wave, we could see that number be extended beyond 2022, depending on virus conditions. Here's Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former CDC doctor, who had this to say about a second wave. Take a listen.
But this still has a long way to go. We are, for all intents and purposes, we are now in the second wave. It's hard to say this isn't the second wave. We're now almost above the peak number of infections that we were at during the height of the epidemic in New York, the national epidemic at that time. So we're going to be contending with this for a long time at this point.
That's huge trouble. And also one of the big pieces is unemployment. So the stimulus, what the OECD is talking about is these unemployment benefits in America and other places. I mean, other countries have done a great job about this, right? $2,000 per month in other countries, also helping to subsidize wages, putting money into the hands of businesses to subsidize wages. So even as their doors are closed, these employees are still being paid. They said this is vital right now, or we could slip back into an economic Great Depression unlike we haven't seen since 1930. They said that forecast jobless rates of 12.9% in 2020, 11.5% in 2021, and that would be compared with 11.3 this year and 8.5 next year if there is no new virus. So if a new virus or the second wave fully emerges, they see it going up to 12% in 2020 and maybe down a little bit at 11.5% unemployment by 2021. So again, unemployment benefits, which are set to run out in just a few weeks, that's $600 unemployment benefits. This is one of the things that the OECD is talking about. Don't stop it. Don't cut it off. Americans are relying on it, especially as restaurants and other places in the hospitality sector and others are having to close back down again. You're seeing delays and furloughs extended. You're seeing people who have been furloughed now being told they're not coming back. Enterprise rental car, for instance. Enterprise in St. Louis. I think one of their big headquarters is there. People who were furloughed being told, we don't need you anymore. We saw what happened with Hertz Rental Car. We saw what happened with all of these other major companies. We saw what happened with Disney. We're seeing actually what's happening with schools. As members of faculty are saying, wait a second, I don't know that it's safe for us to return. And families are saying, we want our kids to return. And faculty is saying, wait a minute, I don't know that we want to get sick. Young people can come back, and then we're all older professors. We're going to get sick and die. Maybe we should hold off on all of this. So we're not there yet. We're only a few short weeks away from school starting up again, if you can believe that. Some schools even starting at the beginning of August. Wow. Florida being told they can go back to school in the fall. Really? Amid this massive spike? And again, so I come back to this where we're seeing the university administration officials saying that extra $600 a week in unemployment no longer needed. That's Eugene Scalia, of course, saying no longer needed. And I get when they're looking at these Congressional Budget Office numbers that we saw a few weeks ago, these CBO numbers that said it's a disincentive for people to go back to work. Now, his argument, I want to keep wanting to say Justice Scalia, that's his father, the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. Eugene Scalia, the Labor Secretary, has said repeatedly that it's a disincentive for people to go back to work, but he said he said it multiple times over the past few days. He said we needed to do it because we were closing down. We were telling people they couldn't go to work. We had to do it. He said, as a frame of reference, during the 2010 recession, we only did $25 additional per week in unemployment benefits at the federal level. Now we're doing $600. He said it's too much and it's keeping people home. But he said we did it, we had to do it. Those were his words. We had to do it because we were closing down. Well, guess what? That's what's happening again. And maybe we reopened too quickly, as what a number of senators are saying now. We reopened too quickly. Look at these things. The virus growth right now outpacing these hotspot testing, where we're running out of tests in Phoenix and Houston and other places, and these states are seeing huge spikes. Well above what we're testing for. Now, if you look at the green line there, that is the testing. So we're seeing new cases emerging well above where we're testing. So again, I come back to this argument, people around your dinner table want to say, yeah, but the reason we're seeing more cases is because we're testing more. No. Tell them no, that you watch Morning Invest, and this is not true. There's a number of different data points that show that testing is not keeping up with the cases that are showing up in hospitals. That's simply not true. So we are entering back. I mean, he's basically saying we can't afford to close up again. Eugene Scalia is saying we can't afford it. It would be devastating to our economy. Senator Mitch McConnell, the same thing. So what do? If we can't close up again, then is this a smart move? Is this a smart move right now? I'll ask you right now in the comments. Is it a smart move to cut this off? I'm not in agreement. I see if these CBO numbers say that it's a disincentive for people to go back to work. I get that part of it. I truly do. And I could see how that would be a problem. I know I've spoken to business owners who struggled with trying to get their employees back to work. They're making more money at home than they are going back to work. It's saddling our unemployment offices with this burden of having to audit everybody. It's a disaster. So could we come up with a halfway mark? Some sort of a bonus to get people back to work, or $400 or $300 in additional unemployment right now to keep people from falling, collapsing. The problem is that so many people have gone back to work. Yes, that's great, but their hours have been slashed. This is another thing that people aren't talking about. So if people are going back to work, these were people who were temporarily laid off or furloughed. They're going back to work. But one of the things that's not in these data points is the amount of hours that are dropped. So I'll bring this up to you. Unemployment is only one metric. This is very important because the OECD says they saw a 13% drop in hours. How many of you have had your hours cut? Many of you have been frontline workers. I know you tell me in the chat. Many of you have been frontline workers. You're on the front lines, hazard pay, etc. You're out there. You've had your hours cut, but you have not been laid off. So you've continued to work, made less money, haven't been able to file for unemployment. Your job is still there, but you have to go to work for less money, fewer hours. These numbers are not showing up in our unemployment numbers. So I hope that administration officials pay attention to this OECD report because it's vital. So while some people may be still employed, their hours have been slashed and they've lost a lot of income. And they have a few plans, the OECD does. They want companies to be able to pick up some of these additional wages that's being paid for by the government. So funneled to state and local governments, supposed to get in the hands of these companies and then subsidize the wages of people. That's what's been happening in some other countries. We haven't really been doing it in the United States other than in the form of the PPP loans. But there's no real audit as to how these companies have to use that money under the PPP program. I mean, are they really coming in? They're going to look at companies that made over $250,000 in these loans and they're going to audit them. But are they really going to clamp down and make sure that 60% went to payroll and 40% went to utilities and expenses and overhead? Come on. Do they have that auditing ability right now? The millions of dollars in loans that have gone out, do they have the time? They can't even get tax refunds completed on time right now. Unbelievable. So that's the very latest on unemployment, but it all ties together with the stimulus. So let's talk about the big news on the stimulus front today. And I think this is really tied together very closely with unemployment. So again, we had this massive unemployment news that just came out from the OECD, the Office of Economic Development and Cooperation and Development, the OECD, Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development. So we had some big news on the unemployment front. And what this means now is that we are looking for extensions. People are weeks away from not being able to pay their bills. And one big piece of what the OECD has said is do not cut back on stimulus. They're looking at 36 countries and they're saying the reason we've been able to keep a lot of people out of poverty is because of stimulus programs. Don't pull back. In fact, put more money into play right now to get people back to work, to incentivize people to enter the workforce for the first time, but also to be able to pay their bills so they don't go into eviction, they don't lose their homes. That's what the OECD is saying among 36 countries. Will the United States do this? It's hard to say when you listen to and you see what's being said by the Labor Secretary and others. When the Labor Secretary says that we want to basically get rid of the $600 unemployment insurance, it's no longer needed, I believe he's just looking at one data point. He's looking at one piece of data. When asked more broadly, though, about the stimulus, I think he's a little bit of a master of spin. Like he's gone, and I'm not playing politics here, but I've interviewed politicians for years. Democrats, Republicans, it didn't matter. This guy is a master of spin. You ask a question, you don't really get the answer at all that you're asking. And then if you're a good journalist, then you probably press again and try to ask it again to get an answer. And that's kind of what Dagen McDowell did here. She went after him a little bit, saying, look, I've gone into stores. I don't see people wearing masks. You're talking about how good these unemployment numbers have been, but I don't see people complying. I see us slipping backwards here. Don't we need another stimulus? So good on Dagen for asking this question. Take a listen to what Eugene Scalia answered.
Gene, Mr. Secretary, talk about the stimulus, though. In terms of what the administration would support, is extending that $600 per week in extra unemployment, is that off the table?
Well, the $600 a week, Dagen, which was part of the CARES Act,
right,
was a really important thing to do as we closed the economy. We were looking at a circumstance where, as an often necessary public health measure, the government was basically saying, you can't work.
But isn't that kind of what's about to happen again? So what really has changed? You're asking people to go back to work, but then we're getting talking out of both sides of your mouth. So thank you, Mr. Secretary, for giving us the context here, right? That we were under lockdown and it's something that we had to do. Okay, continue, Mr. Secretary. Sorry to interrupt you.
And so in that really unusual I think 4 out of 5 people currently on unemployment would get more from unemployment if we continued that $600 benefit going into the rest of the year. And so I do not think that that kind of a benefit makes sense. When in the Great Recession, 8-10 years ago, the added federal unemployment amount was just $25 a week compared to $600. In most states, you can make between $50,000 and $55,000 a year annualized with this $600 a week benefit. In some states, it's about $65,000 annualized on unemployment. I think that's not going to work well over a long term.
Well, no one's saying long term. But we are in the middle of a pandemic, and with states having massive outbreaks of cases again, Florida, Idaho, Montana, Arizona, Nevada, Alaska, Texas, South Carolina, Oregon, Oklahoma, and major California. That accounts for about 1/5 to 1/4 of the overall U.S. economy. Areas where restaurants have not been able to do indoor dining have had to close back down again. So, respectfully, Mr. Secretary, I think we should be taking another look at this, because when those benefits dry up in the next few weeks and those jobs are gone, and many people have not been able to get their unemployment benefits in the first place. So this is the broader issue here, is that many of these systems have been set up to not provide unemployment benefits. They're operating exactly the way they've been constructed, which is basically to not dole out unemployment benefits as quickly as we would like. The systems are a disaster. So look at Florida, for instance. I mean, massive lines, people trying to get, information from call centers. They can't. The call center employees in Florida, according to the reporting there and the interviews that I've seen, they've even said, call center employees said, I'm not even empowered to answer these questions. When people call me, my heart breaks because I can't tell them anything. Great. Where do people turn? So many of you right now watching have been hoping for unemployment benefits. And great that they've extended this with $600 for unemployment benefits beyond what the states will pay, but you haven't received them. So we are getting word from some of the states and local municipalities that they are extending different unemployment benefits. You need to call 211, call your local authorities in your town, your municipalities, and ask them for rental assistance, unemployment assistance in your neighborhood, in your county where you live. Call and find out what is available to you, because a lot of different states right now are putting in place some different packages to extend unemployment benefits on their own. They're using some of their federal money that they received under the CARES Act to give their own extensions of unemployment because Congress is not going to do it. New York, California, and other areas. So please call those numbers to find out if you apply or can apply for them. We also got another proposal from Senate Democrats, which probably will be DOA. So Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senate Finance Committee Ron Wyden, member Ron Wyden. The bill is called the American Workforce Rescue Act. This new bill proposes to handle unemployment with federal aid, but on a state-to-state basis. So more of what some of these states have already been doing, New York and others. So states would get involved, but they would basically use federal money, and it would be based on the jobs percentage. So right now it's based at 11% unemployment, which is where we currently are according to the June jobs numbers. And what it would do is it would remove $100 from the $600 every time we drop another point down to 6%. They wanted to cut it off at basically 6%. So you would drop down. If we drop down to 10% unemployment, then you would only get $500. If we drop down to, it would just keep dropping $100 each time. But I don't see Senate Republicans wanting to pass that legislation unless you hear from the Federal Reserve. Unless we hear again from Fed Chief Jerome Powell, who steps in on this and says we cannot end unemployment benefits at the federal level right now, especially as we're slipping back into this second wave of coronavirus. I know Dr. Fauci says we're still in the first wave. Dr. Gottlieb says we've now officially entered the second wave. Who knows? But I do know that we're seeing a new contagious version of the virus emerging right now in Texas, which is troubling. So whatever wave you want to call it, we still need help. And if you pay attention to what the OECD is saying, and this international body out of Paris this morning, that we could reach the greatest level since the Great Depression. And in their report, specifically talking about the United States, do not cut back on stimulus. Thank you so much for subscribing and being a part of our channel. I really appreciate it. If you're new here, please let me know in the chat below if you're new here, but subscribe. Also, all you have to do is just hit that like button, so I know that you're a fan of the show, and that helps the YouTube algorithm out a lot as well. So smash that like button if I brought you any value at all. Thank you so much, everyone.